What happens when Hollywood's most intimidating actor meets television's most passive-aggressive host? You won't believe what unfolds when Samuel L. Jackson sits down with Seth Meyers for what should have been a simple promotional appearance. The tension in Studio 8G was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as seemingly innocent questions quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most uncomfortable television moment we've witnessed in years. Last night's episode of Late Night with Seth Meyers promised to be nothing more than standard promotional fare. Jackson was scheduled to appear to discuss his latest action thriller, but from the moment he walked onto that stage, something felt different. The audience could sense it. The crew could feel it. And Seth Meyers, sitting behind his desk with that trademark smirk, was about to discover that Samuel L. Jackson wasn't in the mood for games. The problems began before the cameras even started rolling. Sources backstage reveal that Jackson had arrived at 30 Rock already irritated about the show's production schedule. He'd been kept waiting for nearly 40 minutes past his call time, something that doesn't sit well with an actor of his caliber and reputation. But it was what happened during the pre-interview that really set the stage for disaster. Meyers' production team had apparently done their homework a little too well. They dug up an old interview from Jackson's early career where he'd made some controversial comments about method acting and the responsibility of actors in Hollywood. Comments that Jackson had long since moved past, but that Meyers seemed determined to resurrect for his own entertainment. When Jackson finally took his seat across from Meyers, the forced pleasantries were already wearing thin. The veteran actor's jaw was set. His eyes had that dangerous glint that moviegoers know all too well, and his usually animated demeanor was replaced by something much more controlled and infinitely more threatening. Samuel L. Jackson, everybody, Meyers announced to his studio audience, but even his trademark enthusiasm seemed forced. Jackson offered a curt nod to the crowd, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The applause died down, and suddenly the studio felt smaller, more intimate, and far more dangerous. Meyers opened with what seemed like standard questions about Jackson's new film, but there was something in his tone, a slight condescension that Jackson picked up on immediately. "So, Sam, this new action movie of yours, it's quite the departure from your more serious dramatic work, isn't it?" The question itself wasn't problematic, but the way Meyers delivered it, with that slight emphasis on departure and the casual use of Sam when Jackson clearly preferred his full name, set an uncomfortable precedent. Jackson's response was measured but firm. "Well, Seth, I wouldn't call it a departure. Action films can be just as dramatically complex as any other genre. But I suppose that's something you might not understand, given your background in sketch comedy." The words were polite enough, but the delivery was ice-cold, and the studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Meyers, either oblivious to the warning signs or deliberately ignoring them, pressed forward with his prepared questions. But there was something different about his usual interviewing style, where he typically showed deference to his guests, especially those of Jackson's stature. Tonight, he seemed almost combative. His questions came with subtle barbs. His follow-ups felt more like challenges than genuine curiosity. "You know, Sam, I've always been curious about something," Meyers continued, leaning back in his chair with that casual arrogance that was becoming more apparent by the minute. "You've built this incredible career on being this tough guy, this intimidating presence on screen. But I wonder, is that just an act, or is that who you really are?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly, his head tilting in that predatory way that anyone who's seen Pulp Fiction would recognize immediately. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you asking me?" His voice was still controlled, but there was an edge to it. Now that made the production assistants in the wings start to pay closer attention. Meyers, seemingly emboldened by what he perceived as Jackson's restraint, doubled down. "Well, I mean, we all know Hollywood is full of actors who play tough on screen, but are completely different in real life. I'm just wondering if Samuel L. Jackson the person is as intense as Samuel L. Jackson the character." The veteran actor sat back in his chair, his fingers drumming slowly on the armrest. The studio was now dead silent except for the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whispers of crew members who were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jackson's smile was sharp as a blade when he finally responded. Let me tell you something, Seth. I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've worked with everyone from Spike Lee to Quentin Tarantino to Marvel's biggest directors. And in all that time, I've never had a talk show host question my authenticity. His voice was still calm, but there was a rumble underneath it, like distant thunder promising a storm. But Myers wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by the tension he'd created. Oh, I'm not questioning your authenticity, Sam. I'm just saying that sometimes the line between the person and the persona can get a little blurred, especially when that persona is so profitable. The word profitable hit Jackson like a physical blow. His entire demeanor shifted in that instant. The controlled composure cracked just enough to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. Profitable, he repeated, his voice dropping to that low, menacing register that had made him famous. You think this is about profit? The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Myers, perhaps realizing he'd crossed a line but unable to back down without losing face, tried to clarify his statement, but Jackson wasn't having it. No, Seth. You said what you said. You think Samuel L. Jackson is some kind of calculated performance designed to make money. You think 3 decades of craft, of dedication to this art form, is just some kind of marketing strategy. Jackson's voice was rising now, not in volume but in intensity, each word carrying the weight of genuine offense. The host, now visibly uncomfortable but committed to his course, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Look, I didn't mean to imply that your career was just about money. I was just saying that. You were just saying that I'm a fraud. Jackson interrupted, his famous intensity now fully unleashed. You were just saying that everything I've worked for, everything I've accomplished, is just some kind of elaborate con job. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. But this was just the beginning, and what would happen next would make this opening exchange look like a friendly disagreement. Myers, perhaps sensing that he'd pushed too far, but unable to resist the momentum of the moment, decided to double down in the most catastrophic way possible. Look, Sam, I think you're being a little sensitive here. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about the entertainment industry and how actors market themselves. The word sensitive was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Jackson's eyes flashed with genuine anger, and for the first time in the interview, his voice rose above that controlled rumble. Sensitive? You think I'm being sensitive? He leaned forward in his chair, his imposing frame suddenly seeming to fill the entire screen. Let me tell you what's sensitive, Seth. Sensitive is a privileged white comedian who's never had to fight for anything in his life telling a black actor who's worked his way up from nothing that his success is just a marketing gimmick. The racial undertone that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly exploded into the open. The studio audience gasped audibly, and you could hear the sharp intake of breath from crew members who realized they were witnessing something that would dominate entertainment news for weeks. Myers' face went pale, his usual quick wit seemingly abandoning him in the face of Jackson's raw fury. I never said anything about race, Myers stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. I was just talking about Hollywood personas in general. Jackson's laugh was harsh and bitter. Oh, you didn't say anything about race? But you questioned my authenticity, my legitimacy, my right to be exactly who I am on screen. And you did. It with that smug little smile, like you were conducting some kind of social experiment. His voice was now dripping with contempt. You want to know what's not authentic, Seth? A mediocre sketch comedian thinking he can psychoanalyze Samuel L. Jackson on national television. The host tried to regain control of the interview, but Jackson was just getting started. You know what? Let's talk about authenticity for a minute. Let's talk about a talk show host who built his career on safe, sanitized comedy suddenly trying to be some kind of hard-hitting journalist when he gets a real actor in his chair. Myers, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger, made the fatal mistake of trying to defend himself. I've interviewed plenty of serious actors, Sam. I've had Oscar winners on this show who appreciated my questions. Don't you dare compare me to your other guests. Jackson shot back, his voice now at full volume. And stop calling me Sam. My name is Samuel L. Jackson, and I've earned the right to be called by my full name, something you clearly don't understand or respect. The tension in the studio was now so thick it was suffocating. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them looking around nervously as if they wanted to leave but didn't dare move. The production crew behind the cameras was frantically trying to figure out what to do, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was becoming a complete meltdown. Myers, his usual composure completely shattered, tried one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Look, Samuel, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a breath and, don't you tell me to take a breath, Jackson interrupted, his voice now at a dangerous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. Don't you dare sit there and patronize me like I'm some kind of child who can't control his emotions. I've been controlling my emotions for the last 10 minutes while you've been systematically disrespecting me and my career. The actor stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The movement was so abrupt and powerful that several audience members actually flinched. Standing at his full height, Jackson towered over the seated host, his presence filling the entire studio with an energy that was both electric and terrifying. You want to know what's authentic? Jackson continued, his voice now carrying that trademark intensity that had made him one of Hollywood's most compelling actors. Authentic is a kid from Tennessee who stuttered so badly he could barely speak, who used acting as a way to find his voice. Authentic is working in regional theater for years before anyone in Hollywood even knew my name. Authentic is fighting for roles that weren't written for people who look like me and making them impossible to ignore. Myers remained seated, looking smaller and more insignificant by the second. His usual arsenal of quick comebacks and self-deprecating humor seemed completely inadequate in the face of Jackson's righteous fury. I understand that, and I respect your journey. No, you don't understand. Jackson cut him off, his voice now booming through the studio. You don't understand because you've never had to prove yourself the way I have. You've never had to convince people that you belong in the same room as them. You've never had to smile and nod while inferior talents questioned your legitimacy. The word inferior hung in the air like a death sentence. Myers' face went from pale to red as the insult hit home. For the first time in the interview, genuine anger flashed across his features. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait, Jackson commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. You opened this door, Seth. You wanted to have this conversation about authenticity and personas. Well, here's some authenticity for you. I am exactly who I appear to be. I don't hide behind characters or comedy bits or clever writing. What you see is what you get, and what you get is a man who's earned every single thing he's achieved. The studio was now in complete chaos. Audience members were whispering frantically to each other. Some were pulling out their phones to record what was happening, and the production crew was clearly in panic mode. But the cameras kept rolling, and both men seemed locked in a battle of wills that neither was willing to lose. Myers, perhaps realizing that his career might be on the line, tried one final gambit. You know what, Samuel? I think maybe you're the one who's not being authentic here. I think maybe you're so used to playing the tough guy that you can't turn it off, even when someone's just trying to have a conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson stared down at Myers with an expression that was pure ice, his entire body radiating a barely contained fury that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the audience had to strain to hear him, but every word carried the weight of absolute finality. You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic little career. The words echoed through Studio 8G like a death knell. Jackson's voice carried such finality, such absolute conviction, that even the seasoned crew members who had witnessed countless celebrity meltdowns knew they were seeing something unprecedented. Myers sat frozen behind his desk, his mouth slightly open, completely unprepared for the level of fury he had unleashed. But Jackson wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and 30 years of accumulated frustration with entitled mediocrity was about to pour out in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. You want to question my authenticity? Let me show you what authentic looks like. The veteran actor took a step closer to the desk, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the suddenly diminutive host. Authentic is showing up to work every single day and giving everything you have to your craft. Authentic is respecting the people you work with, regardless of whether they can do anything for your career. Authentic is having the courage to be yourself, not hiding behind a fake smile. And scripted jokes. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave lasting damage. Meyers tried to interrupt, to regain some semblance of control over his own show, but Jackson's presence was overwhelming. "Samuel, I think you should shut up and listen," Jackson roared, his voice now filling every corner of the studio. "You've been talking for the past 15 minutes, and every word that's come out of your mouth has been either ignorant, disrespectful, or both. Now it's my turn." The audience was in complete shock. Some were filming with their phones, others were covering their mouths in disbelief, and a few were actually getting up to leave. But most remained frozen in their seats, transfixed by the raw power of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad day. This was a masterclass in controlled fury. You sit there in your comfortable little chair, in your safe little studio, surrounded by writers who make you seem clever and producers who make you seem important. And you have the audacity to question whether I'm real. Jackson's voice was now at a volume that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "I am more real than anything you've ever experienced in your sanitized, manufactured little world." Meyers, his face now a deep shade of red, finally found his voice. "You're being completely unreasonable. I was just asking legitimate questions." "About legitimate questions?" Jackson's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You want to know what a legitimate question sounds like? Here's one. How does a mediocre comedian with no real talent or insight get handed a platform to humiliate his betters on national television?" The insult hit like a physical blow. Meyers' mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his usual quick wit completely abandoned. The studio fell into an even deeper silence, if that were possible. Even the crew members had stopped moving, everyone holding their breath to see what would happen next. Jackson continued his verbal assault with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a hurricane. "You know what your problem is, Seth? You're so desperate to be taken seriously that you'll attack anyone who actually deserves respect. You're like a small dog barking at a lion, thinking the noise makes you dangerous." The host tried one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "Now listen here, Samuel. This is my show, and I don't have to sit here and take this kind of abuse. Your show." Jackson's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper again. "This stopped being your show the moment you decided to disrespect me. This is now the Samuel L. Jackson show, and the only question is whether you're going to learn something from this experience or continue to be the same arrogant, entitled, ignorant fool you've been for the past 20 minutes. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Security guards were edging closer, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. The director was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. But Jackson was building towards something, and everyone could feel it. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" Jackson continued, his voice now carrying a tone of almost parental disappointment. "You had Samuel L. Jackson on your show. You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's lived through the civil rights movement, who's worked with the greatest directors of our time, who's experienced things you can't even imagine. And instead of showing respect, instead of asking meaningful questions, you decided to play amateur psychologist." Meyers tried to speak, but Jackson cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and final. "I'm not finished. You turned what should have been a celebration of art and achievement into a cheap interrogation. You took a moment that could have been educational, entertaining, and enlightening, and you turned it into a vehicle for your own ego." The actor began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. "I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I've never walked off a set. But there's a first time for everything, and congratulations, Seth Meyers. You've just become the first person to make Samuel L. Jackson abandon an interview." The studio erupted in chaos. Audience members were gasping, crew members were shouting instructions, and Meyers was frantically trying to salvage the situation. "Samuel, wait, please don't." "No," Jackson said firmly, dropping his microphone on the chair with a finality that echoed through the studio. "I'm done. I'm done with your questions, I'm done with your disrespect, and I'm done with you." He turned to address the audience directly, his voice carrying across the studio with the authority of someone who had commanded attention on stages and screens around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here tonight expecting entertainment, and instead you got to see what happens when ignorance meets experience. The veteran actor began walking toward the exit, his stride confident and purposeful. But he stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. Seth, let me leave you with some free advice. The next time you have a real artist on your show, try showing some respect. It might make you a better interviewer, and it might make you a better person. With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the set of Late Night with Seth Meyers, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one very humiliated host. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Meyers' shocked expression and the absolute chaos that had erupted in the studio. As Jackson disappeared through the studio doors, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a career-defining moment that would be talked about for years to come. The veteran actor had delivered a masterclass in dignity, respect, and the power of authentic emotion. The studio remained in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity before Meyers finally managed to stammer out a few words to his shell-shocked audience. But by then, it was too late. Samuel L. Jackson had said everything that needed to be said, and his dramatic exit had provided the perfect punctuation mark to one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history.